expecting a child, and we're very tired. Do you have room? No, we don't have room. They go to door number 2, same thing, come a long way. No, we don't have room. Now they get to Ben's door, and little Joseph says, boy, we've sure come a long way. We're very tired. My wife's about to have a baby. Can we come in? And little Ben says, sure, come on in. He just changed the greatest story ever told. Nobody knew. So now these are kindergarten kids. You know, they're 5, they're 6. They're not exactly used to ad-libbing on a stage. So nobody knew how to respond to Ben. So there's just dead silence. Finally, the teacher walks out and puts her arm around little Ben and says, Ben, don't you remember you were supposed to say, no, we don't have room? And Ben looks up at her and says, well, I know that, but how do you say no to Jesus? And my brother says, just like your reaction, says you could have heard a pin drop. He says, we could have had any cardinal, bishop, Monsignor, theologian, anyone deliver a Christmas message that night, and it would not have been as effective as Ben saying, how do you say no to Jesus? One more example of his down-home ability. Right before he left for New York, so it's about 5 years ago, all the members of the Milwaukee media were running around town asking people, what do you think? Cardinal or Archbishop Dolan is leaving. What do you think? And one of the reporters, a TV reporter, found a homeless man. He was gathered right outside our cathedral in Milwaukee. And TV reporter says to homeless man, what do you think? Archbishop Dolan's leaving town. And homeless man says, I feel like I'm losing my best friend. And I was watching on TV as this happened. And the reporter was taken aback. He says, what do you mean? What do you mean you feel like you're losing your best friend? And homeless man says, well, you know, most of the time, people can't wait to get away from me. Most of the time, they don't want to know my name. They don't want to know my story. They can't wait to get out of my presence. He says, but Archbishop Dolan, every time, he'd see me about once a month, every time he remembered my name, he remembered my background, he remembered my story, he'd put his arm around me, he'd tell a joke, he'd make me laugh, every now and then he'd throw a $20 bill in my pocket. That's what a best friend's supposed to do, right? So he says, that's why I feel like I'm losing my best friend. I'm sitting at home watching that going, I'll tell you, if anybody, whoever gives my brother's eulogy, and I hope that's 20 years down the road, better include that story in it. Because what better example is there for all of us? He does what Christ told us all to do. I'll get more stories a little later on. Let me talk briefly about the conclave, all right? The conclave was what, March? Everywhere I go, people want to talk about the conclave. Pope Francis, first of all, isn't he tremendous? I love Pope Francis. I think he's terrific. I hear 3 questions over and over again with the conclave. Did my brother think he was going to win? Did I think, or members of his immediate family think, that he was going to win? What does he say about the conclave experience? And one more, what does he think about Pope Francis? So I'll take them one by one. Did he think he was going to win? Now, as I've mentioned already, if you read the newspapers, his name was on the list. He never took it seriously. Never, ever, never. And again, the story with Matt Lauer, I got a better shot of replacing A-Rod. He never took the story serious. I don't think any cardinal really goes in expecting to be the next pope. I don't think that's part of their makeup. So include him in that. Did we think he was going to be the next pope? Now it gets interesting. Honestly, I never did. And I kept reading things and hearing things and people telling me, hey, you know your brother, he's got a shot, he's got a chance. I never bought into it. 3 reasons. Not that I think he wouldn't be a great pope, I do. I think he'd be a wonderful pope. But 3 reasons why I felt no. 1, he's an American. As far as I know, no American cardinal has ever been a serious candidate for Pope. There is that worldwide opinion that perhaps we shouldn't give the papacy to an American. 2, at the time of the conclave, my brother was just 62 years old. Now, unless you're Karol Wojtyła, JP2, who I believe was 58 when elected, 62 is a baby when it comes to walking into a conclave. So that was the second reason. And the third reason was he'd only been a cardinal for a year. So even though we think everybody knows who he is, because we do, the world really doesn't, or the world really didn't at the time of the conclave. He told me after the conclave that he spent the first 3 or 4 days in Rome introducing himself to the other cardinals, and vice versa. You know, you hang around with the cardinals from your own country, of course, but you really don't know anyone outside that circle. So those 3 reasons, I didn't think he had a shot until the morning of the conclave. What changed? They all march into the Sistine. Doors are locked. My oldest daughter, Erin, finds a story on the internet from a newspaper, a daily newspaper in Rome. And the reporter, the writer of the story, had spent the previous 2 weeks talking to cardinals, off the record, talking to cardinal secretaries, etc. What are you hearing? What are you thinking? What's going on? And he was allowed to publish the story only once conclave began. So the cardinals couldn't see or hear his article. And my daughter finds the story. And according to the story, the conclave began with 2 leading candidates. The Archbishop, the Cardinal from Brazil, and Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York. There it was in print. My daughter calls and says, "Dad, there's this Rome guy saying that Tim is one of the 2 leading candidates. Can you believe that?" No, I couldn't believe it. I just told you why. So that's the morning of the first day. Conclave, remembered, lasted a day and a half. So for the next 36 hours, members of his immediate family, myself, my other brother, my 2 sisters, my mom, my wife, my 2 daughters, can you imagine the anxiety, the apprehension, the nerves, the excitement? I had to run to the local liquor store several times, bought them out of Jameson. We were nervous as you could be. Now white smoke appears. Now, I do a lot of my work out of the house, and my 2 daughters, my wife, all work outside. So we had this little game plan, which was, when I see, chances are I'm watching TV, when I see white smoke, I call the 3 of them and say, "Get home as soon as you can, because it's happening." So I see white smoke, game plan is underway. My wife comes home, my 2 daughters come home. Now remember, there's about an hour between white smoke and man on balcony. So you got about an hour there. It was the longest hour of my life. Just wondering who's going to be on the balcony. So here comes the announcement, Habemus Papam, and I first heard the word Bergoglio before my 2 daughters and wife. I had done a little research about the conclave, obviously, beforehand, and I had read that Cardinal Bergoglio from Argentina in the previous conclave had finished a pretty solid second to Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict. So I kind of, the name was sort of in my head, and maybe he had a shot. So when I heard the name Bergoglio, I knew right away that it wasn't my brother. They didn't recognize the name Bergoglio, so when I heard it, I said to them, "It's not Tim." And they all looked at me and said, "Well, how do you know it? We don't see the man yet. We haven't heard a name yet." I said, "No, it's not Tim. It's Cardinal Bergoglio." And very honestly, for about 2 seconds, I was disappointed. I was. After that, I mean, since then, we're fine. We're more than fine with it. Think about how life would have changed, obviously for him, but for his immediate family. It's hard enough now for us to get a hold of him. It really is, and he's just in New York. Imagine if he was the Pope, for Pete's sake. Now, I imagine I probably could have gotten free meals for the rest of my life. Walking in, "Yeah, my brother's the Pope, and I'll have the spaghetti alla carbonara." But imagine, so there was great relief when we learned it wasn't him. All right, so that's number 2. Number 3, what does he say about the conclave experience? Now remember, he can't say a whole heck of a lot. He called me the day after conclave was over. He was still in Rome. And he said it was emotional, it was exhausting, it was far more spiritual than he could have ever imagined. He said, by far the most spiritual, moving experience of my life. But the little gold nugget he gave me was, he said, inside conclave, there wasn't a whole lot of suspense. He says, we all read the same things you were reading. We all thought, the media was saying there's 10 or 12 guys who have a shot. He says, we all read that. We knew it was baloney. Because of all the meetings before conclave started, he said, we had a pretty good idea who we were looking for. So he said, it only took us 3 votes. And he said, after the second, the magic number hadn't been hit yet, but we knew where it was going. So he said there wasn't a whole heck of a lot of suspense. He tells a great story from inside conclave right after the final ballot. And I can tell the story because just 2 weeks ago I heard him tell it to a group of people. So the secret's out. I don't know if you know how it works, but election's over, and because they don't know beforehand who the new pope's going to be, they have 3 sets of white vestments. Small, medium, large. When my brother told this story, he paused and says, they don't have XL, I checked. So, Cardinal Bergoglio stands up. They ask, do you accept? He says, yes. By what name? He says, Pope Francis. He pauses for a minute and says, to be clear, that's Francis of Assisi, not Francis of Xavier. And then my brother says, so now he's got the papal vestments on for the first time. Apparently, it's customary for then the new pope to sit, and all the cardinals come up and greet him and receive the first papal blessing. He says, Francis, after answering those 2 questions, started to walk down the center aisle of the Sistine Chapel. And he says, all the cardinals kind of looked around at each other saying, where's he going? He's not leaving, is he? What's he doing? And he says the new pope was walking to the back of the Sistine so he could personally greet the 2 cardinals confined in a wheelchair. That was his first action as a pope. I think that's pretty cool. My brother says, what a simple but meaningful gesture, powerful gesture. We knew right away what kind of pope we were going to have, and he's done that for the first 6 months or so. What does he think about the pope? My brother think about the new pope. This magazine, Time magazine, April 29 this year, the 100 most influential people in the world, and Pope Francis is one of the top 100. Time magazine asked Cardinal Dolan to write the little column about the new pope. It reads in part, in his first official sermon as pope, 6 days later, to the fellow cardinals, he continued to captivate us. And he encouraged us, do not be afraid to love, do not be afraid to be tender. The cardinal sitting next to me remarked silently in my ear, Cardinal Dolan, he talks just like Jesus. To which I replied, well, I kind of think that's the job description. He says, stay tuned, folks. We got a simple, uncomplicated, sincere shepherd, just like Jesus, just like Francis, and just what we needed. So he loves the new pope. By the way, Time 100. The year before, all right, so this is 2012, Time 100. I go to my mailbox, and I see the banner, the 100 most influential people in the world. I didn't know this was coming. And I start to glance at all the little photos of the top 100 they have on the cover. They're very small to fit 100 in. And you see the usual suspects. There's Hillary, there's Obama, Matt Lauer, Tim Tebow, and I'm just sort of glancing. And over here on the right, I know you can't see, but I just want to prove it's true, is a guy that looks an awful lot like Cardinal Dolan of New York. And I'm saying, you've got to be kidding me. Very few things that he has ever done in his life has surprised me or his family members. But time 100, come on. So I run inside and I call him and I get lucky and I reach him and I says, Tim, what in the world? I call him Tim, by the way, can you tell? People ask me, what do you call your brother? Frank? No, I call him Tim. I said, what in the world? I said, I just saw Time magazine, and you're one of the top 100 influential people in the world? Come on. He says, well, I appreciate the phone call, but he says, it's not that big of a deal. He says, Honey Boo Boo finished 65th. So if Honey Boo Boo can make it, it's not that big of a thing. All right, for now, enough about him, shall we? Maybe we get back to him later on. I never get tired of talking about him, by the way. People say, are you jealous? Are you mad? And no, for Pete's sake. He's my older brother. I love him. I admire him. I respect him. And no, I never get tired of talking about him. But let me briefly talk about my second book, Waking Patrick. People ask all the time, what's it about? First thing I tell them, it has nothing to do with my brother. Nothing. I want to be clear about that. Some people say, what is it, part 2 of Life Lessons with Cardinal Dolan? No, nothing. This book is about a very ordinary man, middle-aged man. Looks and sounds and talks a lot like me. And as he gets older in life, he begins to ask himself some questions about our Catholic faith. I don't think I'm unique. I think we all do that from time to time. What's this all about? What's that? That doesn't make sense. How come we do this? And I'm a tourist in New York City, and one of my stops is St. Patrick's Cathedral. And I happen to go into St. Patrick's Cathedral very late, and I get locked inside. So now I'm inside St. Pat's Cathedral overnight all by myself. And it's inside St. Pat's where I get a lot of my questions and doubts and fears addressed by a new group of friends. And obviously the book is fiction, but the people I meet in the book all have a direct connection to St. Patrick's Cathedral. There's a reason they're there. And they also have some sort of connection to my personal life. So that's why these people appear to me overnight and sort of walk me through some things. We talk about charity, we talk about prayer, we talk about prayer. I don't know if you feel this way too. For the longest time, I'm saying, I must be doing something wrong because it's not working. What's this? What am I doing? Somebody tell me how to pray properly because I ain't doing it. So we talk about that. One thing I learned from a new friend in St. Patrick's is prayer is not just treating God as if he's a genie in a bottle. It's not always give me this, give me this, give me this, and I could sure use that. That's not what prayer is at all. It's part of it, sure. But prayer is more of a friendship with Jesus, a friendship and a relationship. And it took me 50 years to figure that out. So we also talk about forgiveness. I've got a tough time with that. I still haven't forgiven the guy in high school who took away my girlfriend. That's a tough one for me, but I meet an expert on forgiveness in this book, and he really walks me through it. And we also talk about Judgment Day. Now, I'll tell you a little story about Judgment Day, a story out of the book. I don't fear death. I really don't. Because why fear something, it's going to happen, why fear it? But I do fear Judgment Day. And I'm going to tell you a story about a movie. You're going to think, where is he going with this, for Pete's sake? Well, so bear with me for a few minutes. Do you remember the movie? I think it was out about 20 years ago. It was a Clint Eastwood movie. The name was Unforgiven. Anybody see it or remember it? Unforgiven. It's a great movie. I think it won Best Picture. And in the movie, Clint Eastwood plays an old, retired gunfighter. But he comes out of retirement to collect some reward money to either capture or kill 3 really bad guys who live in town, all right? So Clint is recruited by his buddy, Morgan Freeman, another ex-retired gunfighter, and a young kid. He's about 17, and he calls himself the Schofield Kid. And as they ride into town, to get these three bad guys, the young kid is bragging about all the men that he's killed in his young life. And he keeps saying to Clint, how many have you killed? I've killed more than you, blah, blah, blah. They get into town. Schofield Kid happens to see the first bad guy and shoots him dead in cold blood. They don't have time to get the other two, so the three of them retreat into the hills for the night, build a campfire. And Clint Eastwood can notice that the Schofield Kid suddenly isn't as arrogant as he had been. He's not as brash. He's not talking a lot. And so finally, Schofield Kid comes clean and says, you know, I've been bragging a lot, but that guy in town was the first guy I've ever killed. And he tries to justify it because, after all, the guy he just killed was really a bad guy. He tries to justify it, and he says, but at least he had it coming. And Clint Eastwood looks at him and says, we all got it coming, kid. And the first time I heard we all got it coming, kid, put into focus my fear of Judgment Day, because I probably got it coming. A lot of us might have it coming. I'm far from perfect. I've sinned far too often. I've made bad decisions. You try to do better. You try to get up. You ask for forgiveness, but I've made some, we all have. We all fail. And that's what I fear about Judgment Day. What's going to happen? If I have to watch a movie on my life on Judgment Day, I'm probably going to have to turn away. So I fear Judgment Day. And a new friend of mine in the book really helps me a lot with my fear of Judgment Day. One pearl of wisdom that he tells me is that if we truly believe that our God is merciful and forgiving and just, then instead of on Judgment Day, I've got it coming, it should be, I've got a shot. So Judgment Day is not necessarily all about us, how bad, how good we've been. It's also how great God is. So if we do believe in God being the all-merciful, all-forgiving God, we all have a shot, no matter what our past may have been. So it's those topics and many others that I discuss in Waking Patrick, okay? Speaking of Clint Eastwood, won't make this Clint Eastwood night, but my brother has very few, we all have people you sort of look up to, an athlete, whatever. My brother has two. One, Stan Musial, the late Stan Musial, great baseball player for the St. Louis Cardinals. And my brother was at the age when he was young. Stan Musial was a star, and so that was one hero. The other one, he loves Clint Eastwood. Now, it's sort of hard to figure out, a Catholic priest, a bishop, a cardinal, and some of Clint's movies are a little on the edgy side, but he loves Clint Eastwood. So remember a year ago at the Republican National Convention in, I think, Tampa, Florida, remember? The last night of the convention, when Mitt Romney's about to accept the nomination, and my brother had been asked by the Republican Party to come and give the closing prayer. Remember who else was there? Clint Eastwood. So my wife and I are watching the convention at home, and here comes Clint Eastwood, and he does that empty chair thing. And I'm sitting there going, it hit me. I said, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, my brother's there somewhere. He's about to come on stage. Here's Clint Eastwood. If he meets Clint Eastwood, I'm never talking to him again. So Clint leaves, Mitt Romney, my brother, who gave a wonderful prayer, and it's really late, so we go to bed. Next morning I wake up, and I look at my cell phone, and the little light's blinking. And I know who it is. I know who else calls me overnight, so I know who it is. And I hit voicemail, and all he said, he doesn't say, hi, Bob, good morning, Bob, how you doing, Bob? All he says is, I met Clint Eastwood, I met Clint Eastwood. At that precise moment, I literally hated my brother's guts. I got over it. He said the only thing Clint said to him was, I played a preacher once. I forget, I don't know what movie that is. That's the only impression I do. Another story, when try putting yourself in my shoes for a few minutes. My wife and I are approaching 30 years of marriage. When we had rehearsal dinner the night before our wedding, obviously my brother was going to have the wedding. He was just Father Tim then. He'd just been ordained a couple of years. And, so you go to church, you have the rehearsal, and after rehearsal, he says, Bob, before we leave to go to the restaurant, he says, it's kind of tradition that the bride and groom go to confession. I said, oh, fine, that's fine by me, makes sense. And then I started looking around, and I don't see any other priests there. So I'm going, wait a minute. You want me to go to confession to you? So I had what do you do? So walk into the confessional, and this is a long time ago. It's still the box. It's not the face-to-face. And I said, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. And he stops and says, well, for Pete's sake, I used to live with you. I know that. It's one of the longest I think I actually lied during confession. What else? Where's Mary? Mary, is there a time? Just keep talking, Mary. Or is there a limit here, or?
We said about an hour.
What time is it right now?
Was it about 1:45?
Oh, okay. Well, that's all I got. No, I want to leave some time for Q&A because people always want to ask me about life with Cardinal Dolan. So. I'll stop here. I'll open it up to the floor. But again, thank you so much for... Yes, Mayor?
Just for anyone who hasn't heard, I was hoping you would share your story about when you were young and had your fake masses.
Oh, yes. Thank you. That's a story in Life Lessons book. My brother, oldest in the family, always knew that he wanted to be a priest. Always. From the time he could walk to hear him say it. In fact, two stories I'll tell for Mary's request. My grandma, we call her Grandma Nani. Have you ever heard that name for Grandma Nani? I don't know where that came from. Nani Lou. And Nani Lou tells the story that when Tim was about 5, he came in to spend the weekend with Nani Lou. And Sunday morning rolls around, they get up, they go to Mass, and when they enter Mass, my brother, 5-year-old Timmy, grabs Nani Lou by the hand and walks her up to the front of the church. Now, which she said, now that's a little odd right there. But said during Mass, Tim just he was just fixated by the priest. Every move and everything he said. And finally, when church was over and the priest walked off the altar, Tim tapped Nani Lou on the shoulder and said, when I grow up, that's what I want to be. Isn't that cool? And he never wavered. I think that's cool. Kind of fun. About 10 years later, I went to Mass with Nani Lou, and when the guy with the collection basket came by, I tapped her, and that's when I grew up. I want to be the guy taking money. It's weird. Same parents, same household, we two different brothers. All right, so with that background, okay, my brother always knew he wanted to be a priest. So when he got to a certain age, he would have a fake Mass once a week inside our home. Now, let's say he's 14 or 15. I'm 8. I'm outside doing what all 8, you're outside playing ball or kicking the soccer ball. And yet once a week, he would come to the front door and scream out, time for fake Mass, and we had to drop everything we were doing and come into fake Mass. My 2 sisters, I've got an older sister, Deb, she was in with our younger sister, Lisa, playing dolls or makeup or whatever, and me outside playing ball, and Mom and Dad just got home from a long, hard day at work, and yet Tim says, time for Mass, and we dropped everything. So he had a card table with a white tablecloth, so that was the altar, and he poured a big glass of Welch's grape juice, that was the wine, and he got a slice of Wonder Bread, white Wonder Bread, and he'd take one of Mom's little orange juice glasses like this, and he'd put the bread down on the table, and he'd do this to it. So it would form, the perfect shape, the perfect circle shape of a host. and that was the host, the Wonder Bread, and he would proceed to have a fake Mass, and from start to finish. It was amazing. We never thought a thing of it. I mean, we thought that's what every kid in the neighborhood was doing. We had no idea, you know. And it continued for about a year until, at one fake Mass, little Father Tim tried to take up a collection. And Dad, who is a very patient man, stood up from his little card table chair and said, "Look, I give on Sundays. You think I'm giving to you on Wednesday nights? You're crazy." So no, that's the fake Mass. True, a true story. We had it all the time, and we still make fun of him to this day because of it. Any questions at all? Anything? Isabel, you're just dying to ask something. No? How many people here have actually met him? You have, really?
We were in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
At a convention.
Oh, excellent. Your members?
And he's always been the most friendly person we ever wanted to meet. No matter if you were a millionaire or if you were somebody else.
That's true.
Always remember your name, not to leave it. And always have a hug.
Yeah. No, that's very true. I think that's one reason. Yeah, it's hard to escape his hug. Yeah, you're trapped for about 5 seconds. You just pray he used the right guard. What's that? No question. I think that may be one of the big reasons for his appeal. Everybody likes him. Everybody says he seems like just a kind of a regular guy. He is a regular guy who's a priest and he loves serving Jesus. But he's just a regular guy. He's got that great gift, though, of he remembers everybody. I mentioned that before. It's his gift. I mean, nobody else in the family. I'm horrible at names. I can't remember my name half the time. But people say, oh, he remembered, you're sick, and how's the baby? It's remarkable. Are you still members of the Catholic family? Yeah. Bill O'Toole's a good friend of mine. He's a good man. Yeah. Who else? Anybody? Yes, ma'am. Yes. Mm-hmm. We were at that same Mass, obviously, as family, Irish Fest. I'm sure many of you have been to Irish Fest at Milwaukee's Lakefront, a great celebration. And he happened to be asked to preside at Irish Fest Mass a full year ahead of time. So he wasn't yet named Archbishop of Milwaukee, and he had already agreed to do Irish Fest. So timing, he gets named as Archbishop in June. He gets installed in late August, literally a week after Irish Fest. So by the time he got to Irish Fest Mass, everybody in Milwaukee, of course, knew this is our next Archbishop. Let's go see him. Let's go hear him. It was jammed, remember? They were up on the hills. They estimated about 20,000 people, largest Irish Fest Mass ever. Do you remember what he said first? First thing he says, when he looks at the crowd, he walks out, name of the Father, he looks at this enormous crowd, and he says, now this is what I call a two-collection crowd. Half the people left, but that was great. Who else? Did somebody over here raise their hand earlier? Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry, what about Holy Hill? What about it? You were there when he came home as a cardinal? Yeah, that was a nice event. The weather, I think, kept the crowd down. Remember how bad the weather was? Yeah, the church was jammed, but that was a good event too. He poked fun of me a few times in the homily, do you remember? He does that all the time. But I get back at him, things like this. Who else? Yes, ma'am.
I would think inside when he's at the Irish Fest and he looks out there and sees that huge crowd on the hill, that it would remind him so much of the Sermon on the Mount.
Of the Beatitudes, yeah, I bet it did. Although Christ didn't say this is a two-collection crowd, did he? He didn't go there. Who else? Yes, sir. No, I can't. Thanks for asking, but Waking Patrick's been out about 9 months or so. I would love to write one. I enjoy the process. I truly have, I don't know what I'd write about. Waking Patrick pretty much took it all out of me, so I have no other things that I need to be solved. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am, back there in the red. Really? Yes. Cool. He was back by then? He was back from conclave at that time? Yeah. He loves doing the firefighter mass. Yeah. Right. He does. He always stops unless he knows there's a meal waiting, then he just sort of runs right past the crowd. No, I'm just kidding. I can say that. He loves doing the firefighter mass in New York. That's an annual thing. The backstory to that is 9/11. St. Pat, the Cardinal at the time, was asked if many of the firefighters could be buried out of St. Patrick's, even if they went somewhere else. And the Cardinal said no. So since my brother's arrival, he cherishes that Mass. He says it's always very emotional. And he looks forward to that a great deal. He loves celebrating any Mass, don't get me wrong. But the other one in New York that he loves to do is confirmation. Here, when he was in Milwaukee, he'd have 40 confirmations a year, just like Bishop Ricken does here, but in New York, he only does one. And he does it for the mentally retarded. And he says there's not a dry eye in the house. So he loves that Mass and the firefighter Mass. I'm glad you were there. That's cool. Yeah. He usually does, if he's in town, he'll do the 10:15 St. Pat's on Sunday, and during the week he does the 7. And people who are out there, when I go to visit, they all tell me the same thing. The crowds are double when he's here. People just flock in to hear him. That's cool. It is. Yeah, I know. A lot of renovation, yeah. Time for a couple more? Yes, sir. Yeah. That old trick. Yeah. Really? Cool. Is that right? Is he in seminary? He's not. Okay. Very good. Yes, ma'am. Sure. A good question. How did the fact that I have a brother who's a cardinal impact or influence my faith, my personal faith? I would have said not at all until he came to Milwaukee, because he's 7 years older. So when I'm 11, he's 18, he goes off to seminary. And from the time he's 18 until the time he came to Milwaukee, which was 2002, we never lived in the same town. He does seminary, he does Rome, he comes St. Louis. By then I'm in Milwaukee, goes back to Rome to be a rector, comes back. So for 30 years, we didn't live in the same town. I'd see him holidays and but then you'd see him at holidays or family functions. You're not going to sit around and talk, you just talk about regular family stuff. When he got to Milwaukee, we tried to attend his Sunday Mass every week. Now, at the time, we lived about a half hour from the Milwaukee Cathedral. So not every Sunday we do it, but a lot. So that's when I really saw him in action. And that's when I listened to many of these great homilies for the first time. And it impacted my faith a great deal, and especially my wife and my two daughters. My oldest daughter graduated from University of St. Thomas, and her degree, her major, is Catholic Studies. So that's how much of an impact he had on her. So no, it was tremendous. Life is kind of back to normal now that he's in New York, which is not a good thing. We had those 7 years that he was in Milwaukee. We were kind of just brothers. Go to ball games and picnics and barbecues. He'd pick up the phone, come on down, and throw a steak on the grill. It was great. I never had that for 30 years. Now that he's gone, that's not happening again. So we look at those 7 years that was just a gift from God. We got time for, let's say, 2 more. How about? If we can't find 2 more, 1 more. Anybody? What languages does he speak? He speaks, he's not very good at English. He's still working on English. Now, he's got English, he's got Italian, because he lived in Italy for like 11 years, Spanish, and then he knows like bits and pieces of others, German and French. 5 more than I am. Yes, ma'am. I don't know. How do you think? I think he already had. He certainly changed the tone. He certainly changed already some of the priorities. I love his simplistic view. I just love that. He doesn't live in the papal apartments. He sort of walks around on his own. I love that. He walks into, there's stories all around Rome that he just walks into churches. The Pope is sitting behind you, for Pete's sake. I love that. I think that's great. His priority on the poor is fantastic. How he's going to change some of the larger, I don't know yet. I don't know. His committee just met in October for the first time. The committee that he appointed, 8 cardinals from around the world, to look at some of the heavy issues. So I'm sure there's things in the works, but I don't know. He's not on that committee, no. The American cardinal on that committee is the cardinal from Boston, O'Malley. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I was happy to be here. Is there an A&W I'm going to drive by on my way home to Milwaukee tonight? I need a root beer. I'll be in the back if anybody is interested in a book or two. Okay, and be happy to say hi to you there. All right. But thank you so much.